on this morning's Ag Issues program. A pleasure, as always, to bring on to the program Roger McEowen, Professor of Agricultural Law and Taxation at the Washburn University School of Law, as he joins us on the Ag Issues program this morning. Roger, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Greg. Doing just fine, thanks.
All right, let's get into it. And one of the things that, and obviously you still do some work with Kansas State University, and we're going to talk about today what is coming up, several events, the 74th Annual Kansas Income Tax Institute, but this is where you and others go across the state in many areas to talk taxes, the 74th program, and I guess talk about where you guys are headed and the purpose of the Kansas Income Tax Institute.
Yeah, Greg, this, as you said, this is the 74th year for these. I think there was, if I recall the history right on this, I don't think it's consecutive because I think there was a break around World War II at some point, but might be wrong on that. I think I remember reading about that at some point in time, but this is my 30th go around on these, and we do travel the state. There are 8 locations across the state every fall. Historically, we'll do 6 across the state this fall and then 2 online. So we'll have 2 online schools that we'll kind of book it into 6 with online. We'll have an online one to start out in late October, and then the last one in mid to late December. Then we'll have the second online one, and then 6 locations across the state as we get started with those in early November and finish up in Pittsburgh in middle of December with those.
And a lot of this is focused, up-to-date training on, ever-changing current tax law. One would assume it's ever-changing, and including regulations and updates as well.
Yeah, this is continuing education for CPAs, tax professionals, revenue agents, enrolled agents, as well as we do get some lay people, farmers that attend these, particularly out in the western half of the state, that will attend either in Garden City or in Hayes, sometimes also in Wichita and Salina, that are doing their own returns, or the person that's doing the books, the returns for those farming operations, but may not be a professional employed tax preparer. We get those people that attend too. And over the years, we've also had a number of IRS that would attend, particularly Wichita and Kansas City because of, and Salina, because of where the IRS campuses are at in the state. Now that has really trailed off the last, I would say, years because IRS funding for educational training for their agents was basically cut to nothing. We'll see if the new law and the increased funding has any change with respect to that. Although, unfortunately, out of the $80 billion committed to IRS over the next 10 years, that the lowest portion of that is to go to agent training and people to actually answer phones and service taxpayers that way. That's unfortunate, but we'll see if we can get more IRS to attend because of increased funding. And I think that's really important. My experience has been the better trained that you have an IRS agent, the problems that it creates for taxpayers, and the less training you have for those agents, the more problems and headaches it causes for practitioners as well as taxpayers by IRS taking positions that aren't well grounded in the law because the agents just don't know. And so, educational training is very important, and it is, as you mentioned, this isn't, it seems to be an always changing part of the law. In the past few years, tax season has never really ended. We always, people may think that tax season ends on April 15. Well, in recent years, they've moved that deadline. The Congress has moved that deadline, the general filing deadline, and then there's so much other stuff that's been going on during tax season that really it's become such a headache for many practitioners that the season never really ends. We just passed last week on Friday the one deadline for corporate returns and extensions, and we have another deadline coming up in October for different types of extensions, and on it goes. And there's another deadline that's going to hit September 30th because of something unique that Congress has enacted for penalty relief purposes. And so there's always these seemingly these revolving deadlines, but we'll cover those things on day one at each location. We'll start out with new developments, and of course we're going to get into such things as the new law that was passed, signed into law just a few weeks ago, and digital assets. We're going to go over Schedules K2 and K3, the Form 7203, and the new changes to the research and development tax credit, and then some of the provisions that are expiring and are waiting on Congress to extend. So we'll start each day one at each location with spending probably an hour and a half with respect to those new developments before we get into some of the other topics.
Roger, one thing as well that you look at, probably the majority, one would think, of the Schedule F farm returns that are normally filed within the state. Do they usually come from the practitioners that have participated or have attended the schools as well?
Yes, that's right. Well over 90% of all of the farm returns filed by people residing in the state of Kansas are filed by practitioners that have attended the K-State Tax Schools. That's a very impressive statistic. That historically has been well over 90% for as long as I've been involved with the schools. And as I said, this would be my consecutive year of doing them. And so that really points out the importance and the relevance of these schools for practitioners in the state of Kansas and what K-State has done in starting these schools back in the 1940s and then keeping them rolling all this time.
Roger McEowen, professor of agricultural law and taxation at the Washburn University School of Law, is joining us, and we're talking about their upcoming KSU Tax Schools. They're going to be taking place here starting in late October, and will go through the middle of December. They will have several online events, plus locations, 6 locations across the state. By the way, they're in Garden City, Hayes, Lawrence, Salina, Wichita, and Pittsburgh. And as we mentioned, they'll start out with one online session. They'll actually end with another online session as well. And if you want more information, it's easy to do. Go to agmanager.info/events. And then when you get to the events page, just scroll down and you'll see the Kansas Income Tax Institute information that you can register on as well. By the way, the first online part of that will take place October 31st and November 2nd. So not too far away for the schools as well. And Roger, you had mentioned that I think briefly earlier that the CP or the CEs or CPEs, I guess depending on how you look at that, are also you will get credit for those who come and participate in this.
That's right. Yeah, it's full 400 minutes of continuing education each day. So depending on how their certifying agency counts an hour, whether an hour is 60 minutes or 50 minutes, there could be the potential of 8 hours of credit each day, so 16 hours over the 2 days. And then on top of that, once we're all done, on I believe it's December 16th, the Friday after we finish in Pittsburgh, I will do a 2-hour ethics session live from the law school at Washburn, a tax ethics session, which is also broadcast online. So they can pick up their 2 hours of ethics, and if they attended the tax school, then they get a break on the price for the ethics session. But that's how we'll wrap that up. But this is high quality education. I'll be at each location on the second day. I'll also be on day one for the first online webinar, as well as in person in Garden City and in Hayes with Paul Neefer. Some listeners may recognize that name. Paul is the CPA that does the Farm CPA Today blog. He and I do a number of seminars each year across the country, and those are we focus particularly out west more heavily on ag than But in those areas, we heavily focus on ag. We're going to get into a number of issues. And then on the second day, for the first online one, as well as Garden City and Hayes, I'll be joined by, I'll be joined by Kathy Murphy, who is a retired IRS 8 revenue agent who now has her own tax practice in the St. Louis, Missouri area. So she'll give us an insight as to what's going on in the IRS and teach a couple of other topics. But it's always good to have someone that is, I think, recently retired out of the IRS, because not only do they have that insight and the inside track on what's still going on in the agency, they still have their contacts there, but they're able to freely speak. If you have someone that is with the agency, then there are certain things they can't talk about, so they can't really give as much information to practitioners as possible. Now, in Pittsburgh, we may have the opportunity to have an into the criminal investigation division of IRS speaking with me on day 2 at the Pittsburgh location. Don't have that confirmed yet, but she joined me in Durango, Colorado, in August, and gave a wonderful presentation from the criminal investigation side of IRS, and it's really interesting to hear. I've heard a colleague of hers speak last year, and then had her come this year to speak, and that is fascinating stuff. I know my wife in particular is just enamored by the stories that the criminal investigation division people can tell, and what she'll focus on is how to protect your business from cyber attacks, how people can attack your tax practice, and how they can get a hold of your bank accounts and create all types of havoc for you by using the dark web, and then even the web that is beneath the dark web that they penetrate. It's just a fascinating discussion, very valuable for practitioners to hear those types of things. So I'm hopeful that she's going to be able to join me in Pittsburgh on day 2. But we get into a lot of things, and I'll get to that in a second. But on day 2 at 5 of the other locations, Professor Ed Morse, who's a tax professor at Creighton Law School in Omaha, will be teaching those days, along with Carl York, who has an hour presentation right after lunch each day on day 1 at each of those locations where I'm not teaching on day 1. And Carl is with the Kansas Department of Revenue. And for practitioners this year, this is a very important year to get up to date on what's happened in Kansas. There was a tremendous amount by the legislature last year, particularly in contrast with previous years where there hadn't really been much done. But Carl has a lot to talk about this year, a lot of new forms, a lot of new changes. And Carl's going to go over that right after lunch for an hour on day 1 at each location, as well as for the 2 online webinars too. But then we have other topics we get into. We'll have a discussion of exempt organizations, of course, a thorough discussion of a whole bunch of ag issues. What happens if you had a client that is now a U.S. expatriate? So we have some international tax issues that we'll talk about. Of course, a whole host of rulings and cases and discussion of partnership tax. And for those clients that are older, what are some of the elder issues that come up concerning tax issues? And that would be Social Security benefits and Medicare income-related monthly adjustment amounts and retirement plans, and tax issues of what we call aging in place and long-term care issues. And then we get into tax issues associated with terminating a business. What happens if you're distributing assets out of an estate? What are some of those tax considerations? And then various small business issues. What if you're flipping houses? So is that an investment or a business activity? And then tax issues for in-home care providers. And then, as I mentioned, IRS topics. So a whole host of things that's going to fill up those 2 days. And you mentioned that it's coming up soon, and I see it approaching on my calendar. And the prep time that's required to get ready to present these is incredible for all of our speakers. So that's what I'll be start to gear up for here in about 10 days.
Speaking of prep time, for those who are going to attend, for a lot that you said was going to be discussed, do they need to do any advanced preparation?
Well, that was no, just the show up, them in advance, or else they can be picked up at the door. It's about an 800-page manual that we take 2 days to go through, so it's a lot of detailed information. This is a primary research tool also for many of the practitioners that attend. They find that manual very, very helpful. I think the price of admission is I think, good just to get the manual, let alone the instruction to get on top of that. Plus, since it's run through K-State and K-State Extension, the price is just, it cannot be beat for practitioners trying to find continuing education on these topics.
And I forgot to ask, for not only the in-session classes that will take place and online sessions, what time will those start?
We start at 8 a.m. each day, 7:30 each day. We start at 8. We go from 8 to 9:45, and then have a break, and then pick up at 10:05 and go to noon. Lunch is from noon to 12:45, and then we go from 12:45 to 2:30, have a break, and then 2:50 to 4:05 p.m. That gets us our 400 hours in. That's the schedule for each day. So basically 8 o'clock to 4 o'clock each day.
All right, and I assume there is registration for this. You had talked about that. Is there a way they can register?
Yeah, that's through the Ag Manager website that you mentioned earlier on. All the registration information is there, and there are some info that needs to be completed there to fully register, and it's also linked on my website too. So either place, but my website is going to direct people back to the K-State Ag Manager.info website.
Okay, so again, agmanager.info. Go to the events page. And then once you do, scroll down where it says, talking about the classes that are going to take place, the Kansas Income Tax Institute, and you can register there. Roger, as always, appreciate it. And, I know it's always a busy time when you get to that, so we appreciate you taking the time to join us this morning.
Thank you, Greg.
That is Roger McEowen, Professor of Agricultural Law and Taxation at the Washburn University School of Law, as he joins us on the Ag Issues program here on 580 WIBW.